At this time, I would like to ask Major Fitz to come forward. He's got some interesting tidbits and information about our outstanding history of the Battery.
Okay, for all of you under the age of 30, what I'm about ready to say is one of those things that when you get to my age, you go, God, I wished I'd listened to him back then. We're going to talk about the history of Battery A. Now, Colonel Schmidt over there was recognized by the artillery school as the finest battalion commander in the artillery. He doesn't know this stuff. There's only two people in the room that can correct me. Jim Rooney, there's only two men in the world that ever were first sergeant and commander of A Battery. Jim Rooney, who's sitting right there, and the other guy's uniform is out in that cabinet in the hall, General Jackson, who, by the way, he's been at A Battery dinners when I was there. The other person, where's Ed Ward? Okay, those two guys will probably correct me after this is over. But I'm going to add a little urban legend. We all know that A Battery goes back to 3 February 1866. Urban legend says that prior to 1866, the volunteers in the state of Oregon had a section of field artillery. 2 guns were taken off a sailing ship that couldn't pay its bills before it left, and a local blacksmith mounted the 2 4-pounders on wheels, and then thought it was cool enough when he saw a picture of caissons. That's the part that the tail of the gun hangs on. Okay? The limber is the part that hauls the ammo. He built caissons for both guns to make a section of artillery. Now, I say that's urban legend because that story was told to me by Art Shade, who enlisted in A Battery in 1936 when Civil War veterans still attended the A Battery dinner because of their experience with the volunteers. Now, unlike Elizabeth Warren, who believed her mother, I'm telling you up front, I don't know if I always believed Art Shade, but I think that the volunteers had artillery. Art had a lot of other stories, which I won't repeat now, but I will tell you, we got federal recognition in 1866, but if you go into the records the Secretary of State has, we had an adjutant general starting in 1847. So it stands to reason if we had an adjutant general, we had an organized militia with volunteers, and if you have a militia, they sure as shit want some guns to go with them, because the Indians were scared to death of the guns. We became a state in 1859, but we didn't get federal recognition until 1866. I went into the ordnance records and looked up to see if we'd ever got weapons shipped to us by the Ordnance Department prior to 1866, and we didn't. But do you know Confederate states were shipped weapons as late as April 2nd of 1861? Do you think that maybe had something to do with who the Secretary of War was prior to becoming President of the Confederacy? The urban legend is that there was a vote in the Oregon legislature in early 61. We became a state in 59. In early 61, we were one vote in the House away from joining the Confederacy. That may be an urban legend, so don't bet money on anything I tell you on that line. But I know for a fact President Lincoln kept a full regiment of cavalry in Oregon all during the Civil War. In fact, the most expensive building in the state of Oregon during the Civil War was the post commander's house at Fort The Dalles. And I think back then, General Bray wasn't a cavalry regimental commander, a brigadier? Not a general, but a brigadier, between colonel and... Excuse me for putting you on the spot. You know, I gave you a bad time for not joining the cavalry and going into the infantry, so... Anyway, 3 February 1866, we were organized as Portland Light Artillery. 23 May 72, our name was changed Battery A Oregon Artillery. 1 July 98, we were named the Light Battery A Oregon Volunteers, and we were federalized for the Spanish-American War. They really didn't think Teddy Roosevelt would end it that quick. And by the way, he did not command the cavalry. He was the executive officer. Anyway, 15 October, A Battery was released from federal service. Wasn't much of a war. The Moros in the Philippines tried to screw that up and keep it running a little longer, though. But 16 October 1898, we became Battery A Field Artillery after being released from federal service. 26 June 1916, we were federalized for service along the Mexican border, and we went down there, and in the files, we have pictures of very large piles of empty beer cans, because it was the Oregon National Guard down there. By the way, did they take their guns with them to the Mexican border? Major Ward, did they take their guns? They didn't take their guns because they were issued muzzle loaders, and it was 1916, and all the rest of the artillery was breech loading. In February of 17, they returned to Oregon, and they spent their time down on the border in blocking positions while Blackjack Pershing chased all over Mexico and never found Pancho Villa. August of 1917, A Battery again was federalized. 10 September 1917, A Battery was consolidated with elements of the 4th Infantry from South Dakota National Guard as Battery A 147 Field Artillery, 41st Infantry Division. 41st Infantry Division was Oregon, Washington, Idaho National Guards. In June, A Battery was transferred to the 26th Division, which still exists today. The brigade exists. It is from New England. Later in June, we were transferred to the 32nd Division, which is Wisconsin and Michigan National Guard. And we were demobilized from federal service when we were brought back from Europe at Camp Dodge, Iowa. 4 February 1921, Battery A 148th Field Artillery came into existence. 18 May 25, Battery A became Battery A 218th Field Artillery 75 millimeter, which I assume was a pack howitzer. 5 April 29, we became A Battery 1st Battalion 218th Field Artillery, 75 millimeter pack howitzer. November 29, we got the 5.5s and became big artillery. 16 September 40, we were federalized. Many of the people sitting in this room with gray hair that served in the 218th, we served alongside people that were federalized in the 218th in 1940. They knew it was coming. The next step is the lineage and honor says that A Battery became D Battery, 2nd Battalion, 204th Artillery in 1942. All the talking I've done with veterans, they've never ever mentioned this. One of the things that's unusual is unit designations change, but don't always go along with where the people go. But there's a very, very strong rivalry between the veterans of A Battery 965 and A Battery 218 during World War II. And I've been to a lot of these dinners and sit and listen to them. 1 March 43 was when A 965 supposedly came into existence, or at least that's when the lineage and honors were given. And the battalion was around till it was deactivated in November of 45. It was reactivated in the Oregon Guard as A 965 in 49. Then in 59 is when the 965 disappeared and 218 took over the lineage and honors. The campaign ribbons for World War I for A Battery: Asny, Marne, Oise, Meuse, Argonne, Champagne, Alsace, Lorraine. The big one you should have known about was the Argonne Forest, and A Battery was there. In World War II, A Battery 965 was in the battles of Normandy, northern France, Rhineland, Ardennes, Alsace, Central Europe. Starting out with the battle streamer for Normandy means that A 965 came across the beach at Normandy. In World War I, A Battery received the French Croix de Guerre with Gilt Star for their service at Asny, Marne, Osny. In World War II, A Battery 965 received the Presidential Unit Citation for their service supporting the 7th Armored Division at St. Vith, V-I-T-H. Everybody knows about the Battle of the Bulge and the Screaming Eagles being surrounded at Bastogne. What they don't know is that when the snow fell at Bastogne, the weather wasn't that cold, and there was 6 inches of snow on the ground with mud underneath. The Germans couldn't leave the roads to attack, and the Americans couldn't get onto the roads to retreat. The 7th Armored Division held off 2 panzer divisions at a little town in France called Vith, V-I-T-H, because 5 roads came together at Vith and 1 went out to the coast. That's why the Germans were stopped, is because the 965 at St. Vith. One of the last veteran of A Battery 965 serving in Europe died this summer. And because I'm old, my name just went blank. Clarence Gablehouse. It only happens to you when you get old. I talked to Clarence about his service in the Battle of the Bulge, and he only told me 2 things. There was dead bodies laying everywhere, and my God, it was cold. And that's all he would tell me. But when his stepson took him to Normandy in June one year, the people in Europe asked about the veterans coming back, and they researched Clarence and saw that he was in the 965 artillery at Vith, and his name was printed in the orders of the day, and he was given a commendation by the commanding general of the Belgian army for his service at Vith, standing up to the Germans. Battery A, 2nd Battalion, 218th Artillery, was on board a ship in the Pacific Ocean when Pearl Harbor was bombed. Battery A's howitzers that they were issued in the United States are on the bottom of the harbor in Sydney, Australia, because the troops unloading them were drunk. Again, that's urban legend from people that were there when they were unloading the howitzers. No, they didn't drop them in the bay one at a time. They were putting them on the barge, and they didn't center them correctly. And when they set the sixth howitzer on the barge, the whole barge turned upside down. Battery A, 2nd Battalion, 218th Artillery, has made more amphibious landings than any other artillery unit in the American Army. They have battle streamers for Papua New Guinea, Luzon, the southern Philippines, and they have a presidential citation from the President of the Philippines. Don't confuse the units when you're talking. So when you're at St. Barbara's dinner with the 2nd Battalion, 218th Artillery, and they say something about being at Bastogne, look at them and smile and say, only if you're with A Battery. And as the guys told me from the 965 before they all died, the real A Battery. Thank you.